Okay, so last week I watched a random horror movie that I didn't even know was coming out called Barbarian. It comes from the producer of It and the executive producer of The Ring and The Grudge, and I'm not even gonna lie, this might be a contender for the best horror movie of 2022. Now, I had not seen the trailer for it, but I watched the trailer afterwards and came to the conclusion that even if I did see the trailer before watching the movie, I still would not have really known what it was about because both trailers were very vague regarding the plot of the film. The trailer shows a girl who arrives at an Airbnb that was apparently accidentally double booked and already had a man staying in it. He invites her inside and it seems as though we can't trust this man and that obviously a bunch of scary shit is going to be happening in this house. But it really does an amazing job of not elaborating on what that is exactly. And this was such a genius and clearly intentional play by the creators because it seems like they really wanted the audience to be taken off guard by what they were about to watch. In fact, there is nothing in any of the promotional material for this movie that would prepare you for what this movie is really about. It may seem obvious from the trailer, but trust me, whatever you're thinking it's about is wrong. Not even the name really alludes to anything specific. Barbarian. I mean, the movie is clearly not about a literal ancient barbarian, but I suppose the word barbarian can allude to savagery or violence in some way. At any rate, it's difficult to really determine anything specific from the title. Now, for anyone who plans on watching this movie, I highly suggest that you just turn this video off right now and watch it. Normally I wouldn't care that much, and it's certainly bad for my watch time to be sending people off the video this early, but let that just show you how passionate I am about people watching this movie without any prior information. If you are a horror fan, you simply must experience it this way. Trust me, it's insane. After you watch it though, please come back and fix my watch time. For those of you that have watched the movie or would rather just listen to me talk about it, I will be discussing some spoilers going forward. So, there is a lot to say about this movie, but I think for me personally, it has two major selling points. The first being its unpredictability and how I've never experienced a film that has subverted my expectations on this level, which is what I mainly want to discuss here, but the other point is just how incredibly unique it is compared to so many other modern horror films. In the current horror movie market of the same old tropes being used over and over again to create what are essentially just a bunch of Walmart brand Conjuring movies or predictable slashers, Barbarian was immensely refreshing and unique. I can't really put into words why this is, but it felt as though it was an effort to bring back all of the things that used to make horror movies so great. It wasn't predictable, it wasn't using the same formulaic plot as way too many horror films are these days, it didn't rely on obvious jump scares, it was just so uniquely its own thing, and as I talk about the unpredictability aspect of the film, you'll understand just how much the plot here stands out in comparison to so many other horror films on the market right now. So as I kind of explained already, the film starts out with this girl, Tess, arriving at an Airbnb that was accidentally booked by two people at the same time. I first want to mention that the movie likes to add a lot of little details that I think are there to throw you off the plot, but they don't really distract from the plot either. In fact, they add to the story by making its characters feel a lot more real. The first example of a detail like this is in the beginning of the movie when the girl arrives at the Airbnb. She gets a couple of phone calls from someone named Marcus, and she ignores them both. It makes you think that this Marcus guy will play a role in the story, but guess what? He doesn't. Now Keith, the man that was already staying at the Airbnb, invites Tess inside out of the rain so they can figure the situation out. As the horror movie frequenter I am, I immediately didn't really trust Keith, and it's clear that the movie doesn't want you to trust Keith. There's just something off about him. His mannerisms, the way they frame him in certain shots. By the way, the shots and overall cinematography of this movie is incredible. I don't often make it a point to discuss the technical aspects of filmmaking like that, and I'm not going to go into detail here, but I can't ignore that this movie is noticeably very artfully and carefully filmed, from the camera angles to the lighting. You can tell how deliberate everything is, and it's definitely worth mentioning. Anyways, back to Keith. He mistakenly jump scares Tess. He seems very insistent on having her stay there with him, giving excuses as to why she won't be able to find another place to stay. He tells her it's a bad neighborhood. He tells her there's some kind of convention in town, so the hotels will all be booked. They did such an incredible job at framing this in such a way to make it seem like Keith was somehow behind this, and that he wasn't really who he claimed to be. There's a scene where Tess finds his wallet in the bedroom and she takes a picture of his ID, implying that she doesn't trust him either, only furthering the audience's distrust. Keith later offers Tess to have a glass of wine with him, and he doesn't open it until she gets out of the shower. He claims that he didn't want to open it until she could see him open it, so she knows he didn't drug it. He assumes this is why she didn't want the tea he made her earlier. Which makes sense, but from the way the movie was framing Keith, it honestly only made him seem more suspicious. I suppose it also doesn't help that Keith is played by Bill Skarsgård, who played Pennywise. The movie then does its very best to make Keith likable and trustworthy. Tess opens up to him and they start to enjoy each other's company. You start to think maybe you're wrong about him, but at the same time, it's just the two of them here. Something must be up with him. There's then a scene where Tess wakes up in the middle of the night because someone opens her previously shut bedroom door. She leaves her room to find Keith on the couch having a nightmare. Which is also interesting because this is another one of those little details I mentioned to throw you off the plot. It seems like Keith having a nightmare is something that will play into the story later, but guess what? It doesn't. We also sort of start to think that this movie might have some sort of paranormal aspect to it, with Tess's door opening and Keith having a nightmare right after. It's crazy because at this point in the movie, we still don't even know what we're afraid of. Now the next day, Tess is returning to the house after going to a job interview, and this really rough-looking man comes running down the street towards her yelling, "Hey little girl, hey, come here, hey little girl," and waving his arms around. She gets in the door and locks it behind her, and he yells, "Come out that house." Now admittedly, this scene was something I was able to guess pretty easily because it's a trope that I've seen before, and that is that the scary old man was actually just trying to help the girl and keep her from going in the house. But I will say it's a trope that I haven't seen for a long time. Maybe not since older horror movies, so it was a cool one to see being used again. Even still though, at this point, Keith is still suspect number one, so even if you see the scary old man was actually a good guy trope coming from a mile away, which I think the writers probably counted on, you still think that Keith is the one he's trying to protect her from. Anyways, let's cut to where things really get crazy. Tess ends up going into the basement when Keith isn't home and finds a hidden door down there. Here we go, I thought. We're finally going to uncover what Keith is hiding. Behind this door is a dark hallway with another room at the end, and in this room, Tess finds a dirty old mattress, a bucket, and a camera. On the wall, there is also a bloody handprint. This is so clearly the hidden room of a serial killer. Aha, I thought. I knew Keith was a weirdo. Tess panics as Keith arrives home, but at this point she trusts him, so she tells him about the room and that she is leaving immediately. Now, in this scene, Keith seems to want to downplay her panic and calm her down. He claims that he wants to go look at the room and convinces Tess to stay upstairs and wait for him. Again, he seems very insistent on her not leaving, which, piled on top of all the other things we've seen from him, still makes it seem as though he has something planned for Tess. So Keith goes down to check out this room, which I already assumed he knew about because fuck this Keith guy, right? This is where things get really out of pocket. Tess calls for Keith to come back upstairs, but he doesn't answer. Obviously, he should be able to hear her, right? He's only right down the little hallway. But he isn't answering. It was so clear to me at this point that Keith was just trying to draw her down there because he knew she would come looking if he didn't answer. And she does go looking, but something isn't right. Keith isn't in that little room at the end of the hallway. Where the hell did he go? That's when Tess finds another door just outside of the one with the camera. This door blends in with the wall and doesn't have a handle. Behind it is a stairway that goes far down into a dark tunnel that seems to be dug right into the bedrock. Again, she calls out to Keith, and this time he answers, but he's yelling for help. I still don't trust him. He's luring her down here for some reason. The movie was so obvious about Keith secretly being a bad guy that no other thought crossed my mind besides wondering what he was playing at. Tess goes down the stairs to look for him. As she traverses the tunnel, we see cages large enough for a human being to be in. Another detail that solidifies the thought of Keith being some psychopath murderer. So all that's left at this point is for Tess to run into Keith and reveal to us that he was tricking her, and the horror can really start. Right? Well, that's what I thought, but my god, that's not what happened. Suddenly, Keith comes crawling out of the darkness on his hands and knees, telling Tess to be quiet. He then says that something else is down here with them, and that they bit him. Wait, what? Tess then insists on leaving, and Keith claims that they can't go back that direction because, quote, that's where they were. Okay, he almost had me for a second. Looks like this guy is trying to lure her farther into the tunnel and that he's also mentally insane. I knew it. But before I can even finish that thought, and you might want to sit down for this one. Before I can even finish that thought, this big ass, freaky, tall, mutated woman comes running out of the darkness screaming and bashes Keith's head on the wall until he's dead. Yes, you heard me right. We are 40 minutes into the movie. This is nearly halfway through the movie, and we just found out that this movie has nothing to do with Keith being a serial killer. Turns out he was actually a swell guy. No, this movie is about a fucking mutated inbred monster living under the house. What the actual fuck? I've never felt so fucking blindsided by a plot before. They did such an incredible job at hiding this. This monster does actually appear 5 times in the trailer, but only in extremely brief glimpses and only in such ways that you can't even tell it's some kind of monster. Could be any person. These are the 5 screenshots from the trailer that flash on screen. Like, that's nothing. Other than that, it doesn't appear at all in any of the movie's promotional material, and there isn't even good hints that this movie would contain anything like this. I mean, just look at the posters. They really didn't want to give anything away. It's so insanely out of pocket. But that's why it's so good. They didn't prepare the audience for this at all. This might be one of my favorite plot twists of all time just because of how well it was executed. But as if the giant mutated woman wasn't enough, the movie then cuts to black and we completely leave Tess behind in that tunnel and we are introduced to an entirely new main character. As if the entire first 40 minutes of the movie was just some kind of cold opening. It had me stun-locked. They introduced this horrific, Hills Have Eyes, wrong turn looking freak, and then it's like the movie just restarts. Now, I'm not going to go into full detail on the second half of the movie for the sake of time, but basically we are introduced to Justin Long's character AJ, who is an actor that was just accused of sexual assault by one of his co-stars. In order to fight the accusations and pay his legal fees, he needs to liquidate some properties he owns. One of these properties is the same little Airbnb in Detroit that we were introduced to in the first half of the movie. So long story short, he goes there, finds the secret tunnel in the basement, ends up being trapped down there with Tess by this monster woman, who by the way believes Tess and AJ to be her babies that she wants to take care of. She also seems to have a particular obsession with breastfeeding. Those that have seen the movie know what I mean, those that haven't will have to use their imagination because I'm not showing that on YouTube. I actually plan on doing an explaining horrors video on this inbred monster lady, so it feels redundant for me to go into too much detail on her in this video, but basically, this house did actually once belong to a serial killer, hence the freaky little room with the camera, the self-locking basement door, the human cages, and the hidden passageways. This serial killer's name is Frank, and as we learn in the film, long ago he used to abduct, assault, and murder women in his basement. Horrendous, I know, but it gets worse. Frank would actually impregnate the women he abducted, and then he impregnated those children and the children of those children and so on for God knows how many generations. Yeah, it's f***ed. But anyways, the mutated creature we get in the story is actually a product of Frank's little inbreeding exploits, if I can call it that. Anyways, I'll find a better way to explain that when I make the explaining horrors video. But the movie is then obviously about Tess and AJ trying to escape this terrifying thing under the house. However, despite the big inbred lady reveal and the unveiling of the true plot, the movie isn't done subverting expectations. It actually continues to be pretty unpredictable throughout the entire film, particularly around the character AJ. So AJ, as I mentioned, had been accused of sexual assault and he seems adamant that he did not do it. And because the movie portrays him as a victim of this accusation and kind of puts the audience on his side of the story, making him seem like the new main character, we at first are pretty inclined to believe that AJ did in fact not sexually assault his co-star. However, as we find out during a drunken scene at a bar before he gets trapped under the house, he tells his friend that he and his co-star did have sex, and that at first she didn't want to, but he was persistent and eventually she gave in. She just took a little convincing. So at this point we kind of realize, okay, maybe this AJ guy is a bit of a scumbag, which definitely flips our previous view of him on its head, because after his TV show dropping him, his financial advisor dropping him, news articles coming out about him, we start to feel bad for the dude, just because as the main character we naturally feel like the movie means for us to root for him, but we were wrong again. With AJ, they were basically doing the opposite of what they did with Keith, but they even flip it back on us near the end of the film, where it seems like he wants to make a change and own up to his mistakes when he gets out of this mess. And he genuinely seems to be reflecting on all of the bad things he's done, only to throw Tess off of a water tower to save himself like 5 minutes later. And then immediately after that, he seems relieved that Tess is still alive, and they are going to escape and have a somewhat happy ending, only for the inbred monster lady to get back up and snap AJ's head in half. This movie is nuts, dude, and I can't even sit here and go through every twist and turn it brings you on because we'd be here all day. Like, the serial killer Frank is still alive and living under the house as well. There's also a hilariously cheesy but really effective classic scene where the homeless guy has brought them to what he claims to be a safe area of the neighborhood, and just as he says, "I've been living in this place for 15 years and she ain't never came in this motherfucker," she busts through the wall behind him, rips off his arm, and beats him to death with it. Like, this movie has no chill. I just can't praise it enough. Even outside of all the unpredictability, it, like I said, has a very unique plot. Like, how do you go from two people accidentally double booking an Airbnb to inbred mutant lady obsessed with being a mother chasing people around an abandoned neighborhood in Detroit? Who thinks of that? And I must say, the monster in this movie is used very well. They don't overdo it. There are plenty of scenes without her in them at all that just build up this immense tension, wondering when she's gonna appear again. And the way they have her just slowly becoming more and more visible as she comes out of the darkness in the tunnels is just so creepy. There is some really brutal gore in this movie too, and even that isn't overdone. It's really gory when it is gory, but it's not thrown all throughout the movie just for the sake of having more gore. They don't rely on it at all, is what I'm saying. And lastly, I think one of the most insanely off-putting but well done things about this movie is that despite this thing being a terrifying, disgusting looking creature that's brutally killing people, they somehow still make you feel some empathy for her. She didn't ask to be born like this. She should have never been born. Her brain clearly did not develop in such a way that she even knows what she's doing is wrong. She is literally only trying to protect Tess, who she thinks is her child. It's not a fair existence at all. The saddest scene with this creature is actually at the end of the movie when she sees that Tess is injured and she's clearly very distraught that her baby might die. She wants to move Tess and presumably bring her to safety, but Tess is too injured to move, and it's weird because in this moment, when you look at her hideously disfigured face, you can see the humanity that still exists within her. Tess then puts the gun to the monster's head and she doesn't fight back. It's like she knows this is for the best. And using her barely existent communication skills, she manages to say baby and places a kiss on Tess's forehead before Tess shoots her in the head. Like, yeah, it's incredibly disturbing still, but you can't help but feel at least a little bit sorry for this thing. A line from earlier in the movie pretty accurately sums things up. The homeless man says that she's not even the worst thing down there. And as we later learn, that was clearly in reference to Frank, the serial killer that forcefully brought her into this world. So yeah, needless to say, this movie is a wild ride from start to finish. I've never seen a movie spend 40 minutes before even revealing the plot to us and still continue to shock us around every corner after that. Easily my favorite horror movie this year. But anyways, I should probably end the video here before we all die of old age. Unrelated, but I promised I'd give a shout out to everyone who provided me with Mountain Dew Call of Duty codes from the States, so big thanks to Studio Alex, Pocky Oni, and Andrew from Twitter. Y'all are goated. Anyway, subscribe if you're new here, leave a like, and share the video to help the channel grow, and I will see you guys on Thursday. Peace.